Hey guys, and welcome to another one of my tutorials. So in this tutorial, we'll be setting up a companion AI. And just like I do for all my tutorials, I'm going to show you guys exactly what it's going to look like when we're finished, just so you have an idea. So real quick, this is kind of how it works. So you have this companion right here, and right now she's just set to waiting. But you can tell her to follow you by just pressing a key. So if I press the follow key, you'll see she'll start following me. And then if I walk away again, she'll keep following me. Kind of like so. And at any point, I can tell her to stay. So if I press the stay key, she'll stay. And no matter where I go, she'll just stay there. And then I can call her again and tell her to stay. And then the other thing that's kind of cool is you can tell her to go to a specific location. So if I hold down the move to target key, it kind of brings up this waypoint. And then when I let go, she'll go to wherever the waypoint was. And so you can also look at things like if I look at this pole here, it will kind of figure out like where she needs to go. And so you don't have to be looking at the ground necessarily. Like you can even look at this thing and she'll move there. And yeah, so it's pretty cool. And it's actually pretty simple. And then one other thing I want to mention here before we get started is that, so this map that you see is just from the marketplace. I'll show you guys exactly which one it is if you want to use the same one I do, but you absolutely do not need it in order to follow this tutorial. And same with the mannequin, the female mannequin, you absolutely don't need that. And if you notice, she actually has slightly different animations than the ones I have, and you don't need those as well. Those are also ones I just grabbed from the marketplace. I'll just show you real quick the ones I used. But again, I want to stress that you do not need any of the animations or the female mannequin or the train yard to follow this tutorial. You'll be able to follow along just fine using the third-person template. But if you are interested in the ones I used, I'm using this train yard from the marketplace. It's kind of expensive. I got it when it was free, so but if you want to buy it, feel free. It's just called train yard. You can Google it and you'll find it. And then the mannequin, well, the female mannequin itself is from the third-person template project, but the animations she's using are from this one. So if you want to use those, go ahead. But again, you absolutely do not need them to follow this tutorial. Okay, so with that being said, let me move this guy over here and then open up this one. Give me a second. Okay, so all this is a new project, and this is just essentially the third-person template project. And all I've done is I've imported the train yard map, and then I've also imported that female mannequin pack, and that's pretty much it. So again, feel free to just use the third-person template if you want to follow along, and you'll be able to do everything just fine. All right, so let's go ahead and actually get started here. So the first thing we need to do is actually create our companion. So let's just right-click and make a new folder in here to keep things organized, and we will call it companion. And then in here, let's right-click and make a new blueprint class, and we will make it of type character and call it BP underscore companion. Okay, so let's open this up. And inside of here, we just want to create a quick little character. So on the left, we can select the mesh. And then for the skeletal mesh, here you can obviously use whatever you want. If you just search for mannequin and you're using the third-person template, then you should see SK mannequin, and you should also see SK mannequin female. So I'm going to use the female one. And again, these all come with the third-person template. I'm just going to drag her down a little and then rotate her so she's facing forward, like so. And then for the animation blueprints, if you just search for, what is it called? Okay, yeah, so if you just search for third person, so this one right here, if you select third person and MVP, this is the one that comes with the third person template, and it's the same one that the player uses. But again, I've imported that other content pack just to give it some variety. And so I have this one, which I've just created, but you absolutely don't need this one. It's the same thing. It just is walking, idling, and running, but it's just more female. So, feel free to use whichever one you want, or if you're following the third person template, just use the third person animation blueprint and everything else will work exactly the same. We're not going to do anything with the animation blueprint. So, but this is one I'm going to use. And so then we could take her and we just need to drag her into the world somewhere. So we'll just drag her like right here, kind of turn her to face us like that. And there we go. So we'll be adding some code to her later. But the first thing we need to do is we need to kind of give our player a reference to her, because whenever we press like keys on our keyboard, we want to change her behavior. So in order to do that, we need to have a reference to her. So let's go into our character. So all I've done here is I've just taken the third person character and I've dragged him into the world like so. And then I have gone over here on the right, and if you search for auto or search for possess, you just want to set auto possess player to player 0, and then make sure this is set to placed in world. And this will make it so when you start the game, it actually possesses this character. And I think you might also need to delete any like player starts. So I don't know what map you're using, but if you have any player starts in your level, you want to delete those so that way it uses this character. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to expose a variable for the companion that he has so that we can set it on spawn. So if we go into our third person character and we come over here on the left, we can make a variable and we will call this companion. And then we want to change it to type BP companion, which is the blueprint we just created. And then just to keep things kind of organized here, I'm going to add this to a category called companion, and then it can also be private so that nobody else can access it. And we also want it to be instance editable and expose on spawn, and potentially blueprint read only. If you're never going to change your companion, you can set it to blueprint read only. But if you're going to be switching between different companions, then you'll want to leave that unchecked. I'll just leave it unchecked. Okay, so now we have our companion over here. So now if we go back to our world, we can select our third person character. And then in the details panel, if you scroll down, you'll find companion. And we just want to set it to our BP companion. So we're basically saying that this third person character references this companion over here. And so now we have a reference to her and we can kind of tell her to do different things. Okay, so let's see. Where should we start? So I guess we need to hook up our inputs next. So let's go to edit and project settings. Oh, and by the way, I'm on version 4.26. You don't have to be on that version, but a lot of people ask me that. So that is the version I am using for this tutorial. Okay, so let's go to action mappings, and then let's hit the plus key here to add an action mapping. And then let's just call it wait. Let me look at what I did on my other project, just so I can name them the same. Give me 1 second. Oh, I said it, so I called it companion stay. So basically telling them to stay. And then you can hit this drop down and search for whatever key you want. If you're on 4.26 or newer, they've added this cool little feature where you can just select this button and then press the button on the keyboard you want to bound it to. So for stay, I'm going to bound it to 1 and then hit plus again. We need one for following. So we'll say companion follow, and I'm going to set that to 2. And feel free to set these up however you want. I'm just using 1, 2, and 3 to keep things simple. And then again, we will call this companion move to, and I will set that to the 3 key. So 1, 2, and 3 will be our 3 different behavior keys. Okay, so now we need to set up the third person character to actually listen for those events. So if we go to our third person character, and then we go to our event graph, we can come down here to the bottom, I guess, and we want to hook up those events. So I'm just going to add them in real quick. So let's say input, action, companion, and they should all show up. So we want to just add these. We'll do stay, and then again, input, action, follow, and input, action, move to. Okay, so those are our 3 different actions. And we will just start out with follow, I guess, because she's already kind of in the stay state. So when we press the follow button, we want to basically give her a reference to ourselves so that she knows who to follow. So if we drag in our companion, we say git, and then we want to right click on this and say convert to validated git. And what that will do, if you've never used this before, it just changes the node a little bit so that it has an is valid and an is not valid. So that way it will only continue executing if it's actually valid. So it may be in the event that you don't currently have a companion, then if you try to press the follow button, it won't cause any problems. It'll just fail. Okay. So we want to make sure our companion is valid. And if they are valid, then we want to tell them to follow us. So we're actually going to go into our companion blueprint and write a function to kind of help us set that up. So go over to the BP companion and then go to the event graph. And then inside of here, we actually don't need these bottom 2, so we can just delete these. The but this event play we want to keep, and then we also want to add 2 other events. So if we right click, we can say add custom event, and we will call this follow. And we want this to take in the actor that we want to follow. So on the right here, add a new parameter and make it of type actor. And we make sure you select object reference and just call this the follow target. So this doesn't even necessarily have to be the player. This could be literally any actor in your game that you want the companion to follow. So if you have some other features in your game, like maybe the companion is supposed to follow a car or whatever, or a bird, like it literally doesn't matter. You could tell them to follow a target, and when we're done, then they would be able to follow that target, just like they follow the player. But anyways, let's add the other events real quick since we're here. So let's just say add custom event again, and we'll do one for wait, which is like the stay. And then the final one is moving to, so say add custom event, and we'll call this move to target. And then let's just add an input here. And this one is going to be of a vector type. And then it's going to just be called location. And we'll come back and fill this one out at the end, but let's just focus on the following and the staying right now, or the following and the waiting. So in order to have this AI working, we're actually going to be using a behavior tree and a blackboard. So we need to come back here and create those real quick before we can really continue. So let's go back to our content folder and make sure you are in the companion folder. And then inside of here, we want to create a few things. So like I said, we need a blackboard and we need a behavior tree. So let's go ahead and create those real quick. So right click and go to artificial intelligence and select behavior tree. And I'm going to call this BT underscore companion. And then we also need a blackboard. So right click, artificial intelligence, blackboard, and I'll call it BB underscore companion. And then the other thing you need in order to kind of connect the companion to the behavior tree is you need an AI controller. So if we right click again, I think you can only find this one by going to blueprint class. So select blueprint class at the top. And then I don't think it's in this list. No. So hit all classes down here at the bottom and search for AI controller. And there we go. So we want to select this one, AI controller, and then hit select. And we will just call this PP. Oh, I guess Unreal decided to save, so maybe we won't. We'll just wait for it to finish. Okay. So we will call this PP underscore companion controller. All right, and I'm just gonna do a file save all real quick. And then I think that's, oh, we need one more thing actually inside of here. So we want to right click and we want to create, so go to blueprint and then go to enumeration. And we're going to create an enumeration to keep track of the current state of the companion. So just call this e companion state. And then let's open this up real quick because this will just take a second to finish. So over here on the right, we can add different entries. So we want to add 3 different entries because we got our waiting, our following, and we're moving to target. So hit the new button 3 times. And then we just want to name these appropriately. So we'll call this waiting. And we'll call this one following. And we'll call this last one moving to target. And if you've never used an enum before, it will make more sense once we actually start using it. But you can kind of think of these as just, they're basically just numbers behind the scenes, but they have a name associated with them. So instead of setting the state to like 0, 1, and 2, we can set it to waiting, following, or moving to target by name. And it just makes the code a little bit easier to understand as opposed to just using integers. Okay, but this is all we need to do here. It's pretty simple. We'll be making use of this enum later, so we can just actually go ahead and close this because we don't need it anymore. And then I think for now, at least, that's all we need to create. Let me just double check. Yeah, we'll come back and create a couple more later, but for right now, this is fine. Okay, so we kind of need to connect all these together. So in order to do that, I think, so let's open up the behavior tree first. And if you open up the behavior tree and the details panel here, you'll have this drop down for the behavior tree, and make sure it is set to BB underscore companion. So we're basically saying that this behavior tree references this blackboard that we've created. And I think if you open up the blackboard, yeah, you don't have to do anything in the blackboard. Okay, so that's fine. And then the other thing we need to do is inside of our BP companion, we need to tell that companion to use our controller. So if you select, I think it's in the class defaults. Yeah, if you go to the class defaults and you go to AI controller class, you can hit this drop down and you want to set it to the BP companion controller that we just created. So we're basically telling this companion actor to use this companion controller. And then finally, the last thing we need to do to get everything connected is we need to go into our companion controller. So open up the BP companion controller, and we need to tell this controller to use that blackboard and that blueprint. So to do that, we want to do that in begin play. So we can delete this tick, we don't need it. So there's some handy little nodes for that. You can just right click and say run behavior tree. And then we can select the behavior tree, so BT companion. And then we also want to tell it to use the blackboard. So we can right click and say use blackboard. And then we can select our blackboard. Okay, so now everything's kind of connected together. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but all we've done is we've just said that our companion uses that companion controller and the companion controller uses that blackboard and that behavior tree. So now anything we add to these will kind of work nicely together. Okay, so coming back here to our follow function inside of our companion, what we want to do is we want to change the values inside of our, or maybe we should do the behavior tree first. Maybe that'll make more sense. Yeah, so let's actually start in the behavior tree and then we'll come back. So if you've never used a behavior tree before, it's actually not super complicated, especially once you kind of understand everything. But essentially what they do is they tell or they give the AI instructions on how they should behave based off of different parameter values. And the parameter values all come from the blackboard. So let's go to the blackboard and add the variables we need, and then we'll start writing the behavior tree, or at least part of it. So up here at the top left, there's this hit button for new key. And this kind of adds like a new variable to the blackboard. So we want to add a variable here for right now for the companion state so that I can keep track of what state the AI is in. Like, are they following? Are they moving to a target? Are they waiting? So if you hit this, we want to add an enum type because if you remember our state, our companion state is of type enum. So we want to add an enum and we will just call this companion state. And then one thing that's really important that a lot of people forget to do is over here on the right, you need to hit this little drop down and you need to specify what type of enum it actually is. So in this drop down, you want to search for the E companion state, and that's telling the Blackboard that the enum type is of type, excuse me, the enum type is of type companion state. Okay, and then the other thing we can add while we're here is the actor that we're following. So if you hit this drop down, there actually is no actor option in here, but you can select object and that will work fine. And then we want to just set it to follow actor. So that's the name of it. And then over here on the right, this is also really important. Make sure when you hit this drop down that for the base class, you select actor. And again, that's just telling the Blackboard that this object, even though it's an object, it's actually referencing an actor. If you don't do this, then it won't work. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go back to our behavior tree and we can start writing the logic here. So what we kind of want to do in this behavior tree, because this kind of runs like every tick, essentially, like each frame this will run and figure out what it should be doing. And so each tick, we want to look and see what our current state is. Like, are we currently waiting or following or whatever? Because whatever state we're in, we're going to want to do different things. So in order to do that, you need to add something called a selector. So if you right click and go to composites and then hit selector, it will add a selector. And we just want to hook this up to the root. So it's going to start here and then go down to here. And then what the selector does, if you hover over it, it kind of explains it. It says it goes through each of its children from left to right, and it will stop executing when one of its children succeeds. So it kind of tries to do each thing in the list. And then when one of them finally succeeds, then it stops. And so it kind of selects the correct one, essentially. So what we want to do here is we want to add some different tasks. So when we're waiting, let's write that one first because it's really simple. So when the character is told to wait, we actually just want to tell them to use the wait task. So if you right click and search for wait, there is actually one of these already. So we can just hit that. And this will tell them to wait. And you can tell them to wait for a certain amount of time, but it doesn't really matter what time you put here because when we tell them to follow or move to a target, we're going to immediately abort out of this. So you can just leave it as 5 seconds. It doesn't actually really matter. But we can't just quite hook this up yet because we only want to do the wait if we're in the waiting state. So in order to specify that, you can right click on this and say add decorator. And decorators are essentially um, they're kind of like checks, like if checks, sort of, but they're kind of specialized to Blackboard. So we want to add a decorator for checking a Blackboard value. So you can hit this Blackboard up here at the top, and you can see what this does is it allows you to check a Blackboard value. So the Blackboard key that we want to select here is the companion state, because that's the one we care about. And then we want to check if it's equal to waiting. So it's kind of already done that for us by default, but make sure the key value is set to waiting and the key query is set to is equal to, because that's what we care about, right? We only want to do this if the companion state is equal to waiting. And so once we have that, we can just go ahead and hook this up. And then the other thing that's really important here is if you select the blue part over here, the decorator, you want to make sure we change observer abort to self. And the reason we need to do that is because otherwise, let's say the character is currently waiting, right? And then the player tells them to follow. Well, if you don't have it set to abort on self, then it won't actually abort out of this until it's finished waiting. So they'll keep waiting until the 5 seconds has elapsed, and then they'll start following. But if you set it to self abort, then as soon as they're told to follow, it will be able to abort out of this chain and go on to the next part. Okay, and then next, let's do the following. So for the following, we actually want to do a sequence because for the follow, we want them to first move to the location of wherever the character is. And then once they get there, we want them to wait for a second. And the reason we want to do that is because if you don't do that, then the character will just like instantly. Actually, I'll just show you my other project. I'll remove it real quick because this is kind of what it looks like on my other project. This is just what I'm copying here. If it lets me. Yeah, so this is what we've done over here on the left. We did the wait, and now we're doing the follow. And you see it has a move to, and then it has a wait. If I remove this wait, and then I run it, and I tell her to follow me, you'll see that she kind of just like doesn't ever stop following me. She's like, it's almost unrealistically how quickly she reacts to where I go. But if you add a little wait, then she kind of more naturally waits a second before she starts following me. So you can see I tell her to follow, and then I move, and she kind of waits a second, and then she follows. So it's just a little bit more natural. So that's what we're going to be doing. So over here, let's add a sequence. So right click and as a compositor and a sequence. And a sequence is very similar to a selector, except the difference is that if you hover over it again, it says it will execute its children from left to right, just like a selector, but it will stop executing when one of its children's fail. So it'll actually do multiple things, whereas a selector will only do one thing. This will just keep doing things until one of them fails. And then we want to add this Blackboard condition again so that it only goes in here if we are actually following. So add a Blackboard condition. And then we want to set this one to, again, we want to say companion state is equal to, and then we want to change this to following. We should probably rename these two. So let's down here at the bottom, let's just call this following, just so we can kind of visually see what's going on. And then this one, let's rename it to waiting. These names don't do anything, they're just kind of for your sake. So we got waiting, following, and we can hook this up. Like so. And then again, make sure you change the observer aborts to self for the same reasons I explained before. And then in here, we want to do a move to. So right click and say move to. This is just a built-in task, and we can hook that up. And then it wants to know the location or the actor that you want to move to. So over here on the right, make sure you select the follow actor because obviously we want to move to the actor that we are following. And then after that, we can drag off this and say wait. And then this is that wait I was talking about to make it look a little bit natural. So 5 seconds is a bit too long. So I set it down to 1.5 seconds, and then you can give it a random deviation, which is essentially how much it will randomly deviate from that amount. So if you set this to 0.5, then it's basically telling the computer to, wait for anywhere between 1 and 2 seconds. And so there we go. That seems good. And then when we, after we get this working, we'll actually have one more here, and we'll hook it up to the move to, but we're going to do that last, so we're just going to leave this as is for right now. So we can say file and save all just to make sure we save this. So now that we have this behavior tree set up correctly, we actually just need to go and set these Blackboard values, right? Because you can see we're using like the companion state, we're using the follow actor, like we're using these values inside the blackboard, but they're never actually being set anywhere. So we need to actually set them like when we press our keys, right? So let's see, let's go back to our BP third person character. Just trying to remember where I left off here. Right, okay. So we left off here. So yeah, let's just focus on follow and stay for right now. So for follow, we want to make sure our companion is valid, and then we want to call follow. So if we drag off of this, we can call that follow function that we wrote inside of our BP companion. And then we need to pass in the follow target, which is going to be ourselves. So if we drag off of this, we can say get ref to self, and that will get a reference to ourselves, obviously. And then I'm just going to add a little print string here just so we can see what's going on. Just say print string, and we will print out following player. And then we want to do pretty much the same thing up here for when we press stay. So I'm just going to copy this guy. So we'll make sure our companion is valid. And if they are, we will say wait. Maybe I should change this to stay just to stay consistent, but we'll just call that wait function to tell them to wait there. And then we'll print this out. And we'll just say waiting, like so. Okay, so now we need to fill out these two functions. So I'm just going to double click on the follow one just to come inside of here, because remember, these are just empty for right now. But if you run it real quick, just so we can test, if you run it real quick, you should be able to, when you press 1, it should say waiting at the top left. And when you press 2, it should say following player. If it doesn't say that, like, make sure you have this set up correctly and make sure that your companion is set in the details panel. Like, make sure when you click on your character, it says companion over here. But yeah, that should definitely work because that's pretty straightforward. So let's go back to these functions. Okay, so for the following, we need to do two things. We need to first set this guy, this follow actor. We need to set this variable to the player so that it knows who to follow. And then we need to set the companion state to following. So we need to do two things. So over here, we're actually going to call into our controller, and the controller will kind of wrap up that functionality for us to make it easier and reusable. So let's go to our BP companion controller where we did this stuff. And then inside of here, we're going to add a couple of little events. They're going to be really simple. So we'll say add custom event, and we will call this one set companion state. And so all this is going to do is be responsible for changing the state inside of our Blackboard. So in order to do that, we can actually just right click and say get Blackboard, and we can just use this variable here. And there's a handy little function called set value. And if you type set value, you actually get a lot of options here. And the one you select is obviously important. It needs to match the thing that you're trying to set. So currently we want to set the companion state, and the companion state is an enum. So we need to use set value as enum, like that. And then we can hook this up. And then we just need to specify the enum. So we can really just, let me think here. Actually, what did I do for this? Right, so for the component state, just add a new input parameter and change the type to e companion state. And then you should just be able to plug this in like so, yeah. And then for the key name, we can drag off this and say literal or make literal name. And that will give us a little text box here. And then you need to type the name here of whatever the value is inside of the Blackboard. So we need to type companion state. And make sure you spell this correctly, because if you don't, like, it's not going to give you any error. It's just not going to work. So make sure companion state is spelled correctly. It needs to match whatever you have over here. You can even right click on this and press F2 and then copy it, and then come back here and paste it just to be sure. But it's really important that whenever you're doing these, you need to spell this correctly. It needs to match the name in the Blackboard or it's not going to work. Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward. Just gives us the ability to set the companion state. And then we also want one more for setting the follow actor. So we'll right click and say add custom event, and we'll call this set follow actor. And so for this one, it needs to take in the actor that we want to follow. So add a new parameter, change it to type actor, object reference, and we will call this the follow target, or I guess follow actor would be better, follow actor. And then just like we did up here, we want to kind of do this again. So I'm going to copy this Blackboard variable and paste. And again, we want to say set value, except this time we don't want to use enum because we want to set it as an actor. And so we need to select object because actors are objects, right? So we'll select object, look that up, and then drag our follow actor into our object value. And then for the key name, again, we can say make literal name. And then you need to pass in, again, the name that matches inside the Blackboard. So I'm just going to go back to the Blackboard real quick and copy this just so I don't mess it up and paste it here. So that should say follow actor. Okay, so that's those two functions. Now we can go back to our companion and we can actually call those functions. So for the follow, we want to first, like I was saying before, we want to do two things. So we want to first set the actor that we're going to follow. So we need to get our controller. So to do that, we can just right click and say get AI controller. And then for the controlled actor, that's just ourselves. So we'll say get self reference. And then we want to cast this to our specific type of companion or our specific type of controller. So we'll say cast to companion controller. And then actually, let's just do this up here in the begin play so that we only have to do it once. So just drag us up here to the begin play. And then we want to take this return value and we'll just save it as a variable. So that way we don't have to do this every time. So we'll just right click and say print variable. And we will call this the companion controller. And then I'm just going to set this to private just so it can't be accessed outside the class. And then from here, we can drag in our companion controller and we can say set follow actor. And so the follow actor is going to be whatever is passed into this follow function. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this. And we want to also change the state to following. So we'll right click, or not right click, but drag off of this and say set companion state. And we can just select following like so. So pretty straightforward. When we're told to follow, we get our controller, we set the follow actor to whatever actor was passed in, which of course is the player in this case, and then we set the companion state to following. And then for waiting or for staying, we just want to set the companion state back to waiting. So if we just take these two nodes, copy and paste, hook that up, and then make sure you change this to waiting. Okay, and then we'll fill this move to target stuff out later at the end. But for right now, I think that is good. I think that might actually be everything we need to do, unless I forgot something. I may have forgot something obvious, but we'll run it real quick and see what happens. Oh, wait, I did forget one thing I already know. Back in our third-person character. Oh, wait, nope, I did do this. Okay, so let's just go ahead and play this and see if it works. So we got our companion over here. If we press 2, it says follow player. Oh, I know what we forgot. We forgot to add a nav mesh. So that's why they're not following, because there's no nav mesh, so there's no navigation, so they don't know how to get to me. So go back to your map, whatever map you happen to be using. Again, it doesn't have to be this one. And then go to place actors and search for nav. And the one we want is nav mesh bounds volume, and just drag this guy in. And then you want to make sure that it's kind of set so that it's in the ground. And then a good way to visualize it, if you go up to show at the top, you can hit this checkbox for navigation. And you should see a green area wherever you have this set to. If it's not overlapping with anything, you won't see the green. So you need to be overlapping with the ground or wherever you want the navigation to work on. So obviously this is way too small. It needs to be a lot larger. So I'm going to just kind of zoom out here just to get an idea. And then over here in the details panel, if you scroll down, there's brush settings. So you want to change these values. So I'm going to try like 2000. 2000. Okay, that's still too small. 10,000. 20,000 maybe. There we go, something like that. Move that over, and then we'll do 20,000 on the Y too. There we go. That's a little bit too small still, 25,000. There we go. Oh wait, was that? Oh, that's 250. That's way too big. 25,000. Okay, so I just need enough to cover in this like fenced area, but you want to make this however big your map is so that they can travel on the whole map, or at least whatever section of the map you want them to be able to walk on. And if you need to change the height of it, you can do that as well. Like if you have ramps and stuff, you can change the height of it to be something other than 200. But I don't need them to go like on top of these trains or anything. So this is probably good for me. So now if we run this again, I'm going to turn this off just because it's kind of ugly. I'm going to turn this back off, hit play, and then press the follow button, and you can see she runs to me. And if I move away, she keeps following. Oh, and I forgot one other thing I did. She kind of gets a little bit too close for comfort here. So let's go back to the behavior tree. And then in the move to, let's set the acceptable radius to something like 100 maybe, to say like, as long as you're within 100 units of me, then you're officially, you're next to me and you don't have to get any closer. So let me just save this and then run it again. F2. And so there we go. So now she doesn't get like super close to me. And you can change that number obviously to whatever you want. And then one other thing I want to fix here before we move on to the move to target functionality is you can see she kind of like snaps around really quick, like kind of janky movement with her rotation. And I think the way I fix that is, let's see. So if you go to your companion and you go to, I never remember where this is, so just bear with me for a second. Okay, so I think in the class defaults, you want to turn off use control rotation, y'all. And then in the character movement component, if you search for rotation, you should get all the options we need. So we want to turn on orient rotation to movement. And then I think that is good. And then make sure your Z value is set to something close to 360, because that's essentially how fast she'll rotate. So now if we play it again and we tell her to follow, you can see she now rotates much more smoothly. She doesn't just like instantly snap to wherever she's running to. And if you want to slow her down or speed her up, you can do that as well. Like if you search for the max walk speed, you can set this down to like 400 and she'll be slower or faster. I'm not going to go into like all the different options in this tutorial for that type of stuff, but you can definitely play around the character movement component and get her to behave kind of how you want. But yeah, okay, so I think this part is done. So part 2, we're going to go over the move to target functionality with the waypoint. So I'll see you guys in part 2.